What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome to Fresh Comic Stories. Guys, this is the channel that we basically sit down and cover different kinds of comic book stories from Marvel to DC and even IDW as well. But today, we're going to jump back over to Marvel, and we are going to continue our coverage over the Spider-Man landscape, because in the last couple months, we have covered a lot of characters who made their first appearance in Spider-Man comics, like Black Cat, Rhino, Mary Jane, and so I felt like today we should cover the first appearance of the Kingpin. Now, the Kingpin is a well-known villain in Marvel Comics for Spider-Man and even Daredevil as well. And so guys, this is the first time that the Kingpin has ever appeared in Marvel Comics. So I do hope you enjoy today's video. Now, when it comes to the opening chapter of this story, you have Stan Lee give us Spider-Man being, well, Spider-Man. We get to see him fighting against a bunch of thugs. It's him trying to save this couple from this group of thugs. And really, it's just Stan Lee just showing us what fans back then truly wanted, to watch their favorite hero be a hero. Now, after he is able to defeat these thugs, this is where we see one of the plot points of this story right off the bat, where you have the wife of this couple try to thank Spider-Man for saving her life. Her husband stops her because to him, Spider-Man is dangerous, and the reason why he believes that is because the Daily Bugle keeps telling stories about how evil Spider-Man is. And this upsets Spider-Man because other heroes get praise and love, but for him, half the city hates him because some man who runs a paper hates him. But after being Spider-Man and getting back to his apartment, you have Harry Osborn tell Peter Parker he needs to go back to Aunt May's house, because while he was out being Spider-Man, Mary Jane Aunt called the apartment to tell Peter that Aunt May is seriously ill with something. And so you have Peter run over there to see his aunt, where we find out that she is okay for now, but she is on bed rest. This leads to the next day, where things continue to get worse for Peter, where you have one of his professors tell him that his grades is slipping and he needs to get his act together. And you even have Peter Parker having a hard time getting a date with Gwen Stacy. At this point, she's still around in comics. And so this leads to Peter Parker going back home, and he begins to wonder about him being Spider-Man. Because with him being Spider-Man, it makes it harder for him to be Peter Parker. Aunt May got sick and he was not around to help her like he wants to. His grades is slipping and his dating life is going nowhere. With the fact that every day he goes out there and tries to be a hero to help people in the city, only to have them end up hating him because of J. Jonah Jameson and the Daily Bugle. By the next page, you have Peter Parker taking his spider outfit and throwing it in the trash and calling it quits. Of course, this leads up to the next day, where we see this little kid running into the Daily Planet with something in his hand to give to J. Jonah Jameson, to tell him he had found Spider-Man's outfit. And this tells JJ that Spider-Man has quit being Spider-Man. And so you have JJ start sharing the news all over New York through his newspaper, and even going on interviews with various news channels, getting the word out there that Spider-Man is no longer around. And with the news getting out there now, this is where we get our first look at the Kingpin ever in Marvel Comics, where you have him tell his assistant that with Spider-Man now gone, it is time to get all of the gangs to come together now and get ready to take over New York. This is where we pick up with a character named Frederick Foswell, who was this character who apparently ran a mob group back in the day until he got caught and thrown in jail. But after getting out, JJ gave him a job at the Bugle as a way to turn his life around. And so anytime he is trying to collect information for a story or something for his own needs, he goes under a disguise and calls himself Patch. This is where he hears about the Kingpin plans, having all the gangs coming together to work as one big group now, but under the Kingpin. And this tells Foswell that with Spider-Man quitting, the underworld is able to finally take over New York. And so you have Foswell run over to the Bugle to tell JJ about what he had found out, only for him to be interrupted by Peter Parker, because the story wants to focus on him no longer being Spider-Man and how things are going to start to be better for him. And you have him walk into the Daily Planet and quit his job there. He is thinking about working for Norman Osborn. Peter does not know that Norman is the Green Goblin just yet. But other things start to go great for Peter, finally being able to spend some time with Gwen Stacy, which was something he always been trying to do. And when he goes to check up on Aunt May, she is doing better now and able to go out to places, showing Peter that if he was not Spider-Man, his life would be easier. Except while Peter is at home no longer being Spider-Man, Kingpin's men are out there causing havoc and actually taking over the city, showing us that as soon as Peter Parker retired from being Spider-Man, things began to fall apart for the city of New York. This leads to a moment where Peter is out on his motorcycle trying to enjoy a peaceful night, only to see an elderly man getting jumped by a bunch of Kingpin's men at the moment. And so you have Spider-Man go up there and stop these thugs, where he has to take care of them quickly before people get the idea that he is Spider-Man, because he is now wearing his Spider-Man outfit. But after doing that, he wondered why he intervened. Why did he help out? And that is when he remembers what Uncle Ben told him. With great power comes great responsibility. And with him having a flashback of how his uncle died, Peter decides to be Spider-Man once again. Which then leads us to see Peter Parker sneak into the Daily Bugle and steal back his Spider-Man outfit from Jonah's office. And so when Jonah walks into the room, he sees Spider-Man chilling at his desk, letting Jonah know that he is back now. Then we get a small glimpse of Foswell meeting up with the Kingpin, because Foswell does not like the idea of someone being in charge of the mobs, because again, Foswell used to run the underworld, and so he thought he could go and command the Kingpin to hand over everything, where you had the Kingpin tell him no and holds him hostage. But we then pick up with the Kingpin the next day, and the Kingpin still thinks that Spider-Man is no longer around. And so with him thinking that, this leads to the Kingpin thinking about moving forward with his plans to take over the city. But when he gets the latest newspaper, we see that Jonah has published a story about how there is a rumor how the underworld is trying to take over the city. And so this leads to the Kingpin telling his men that it is time to get rid of Jonah once and for all. And so you have the Kingpin send some of his men to silence Jonah, while he sends another group to go out and collect money from businesses. Now you have Spider-Man swing around town as usual, where he is just going around town and trying to get used to being Spider-Man again. That is when he sees the Kingpin's men that were sent out to collect money from random shops in the city. And so you have Spider-Man swing down and stop them. Now while he is fighting them and delivering a beatdown like no other, you have some of the men being able to escape from Spider-Man, and this will lead to them being able to tell the Kingpin that Spider-Man is back in the picture again. But before they do that, we pick up with the Kingpin in his office wondering what he should do with Foswell. Remember, Foswell barged into the Kingpin's office telling Kingpin that he is going to be the one in charge, which led to the Kingpin showing him that is not going to happen. But he was able to come to some kind of deal with Foswell that they can work together, just Kingpin is still in charge. But right after they agree on that, you have the men who escaped from Spider-Man run into Kingpin's office to tell him that Spider-Man is back, which makes the Kingpin freak out because now it seems like his plans are about to fall apart. And so you have the Kingpin tell Foswell that he is going to help get rid of Jonah first. Which of course we pick up with Jonah at the Daily Bugle, and this is where we see him freaking out because he is trying to get more information about the underworld trying to take over New York, also trying to figure out what had happened to Foswell. This leads to Peter Parker coming to Jonah about getting his job back, and of course, he was able to get his job back. Except this moment leads into Peter Parker hearing about how Foswell is missing and wondering where he could be at. Now this leads to Peter Parker just going around town like everything is normal, except that is when he sees a bunch of Kingpin's men about to do something evil. And so you have Peter Parker change into his Spider-Man outfit to see what is going on, and we're of course leads to him fighting these guys. Now this fight does two things, which is the first, it lets Spider-Man hear the name Kingpin, letting him know that he needs to find this Kingpin person and stop him. Also, one of the thugs throws a grenade, which of course makes the building start to collapse, and so Spider-Man throws a spider tracer to follow them later while he tries to hold the building up to let innocent people get out before it falls. Then we jump over to Jonah, where he is still at the Daily Bugle, and this is where we see some of the Kingpin's men arrive to take him to the Kingpin, and so they blindfold him and force him into the car to meet the Kingpin. Now when he gets to the Kingpin's office, this is where you have the Kingpin tell Jonah that he plans to get rid of Jonah for publishing articles about the underworld trying to take over New York. And while he's explaining his plans, that is when you have the Kingpin's men who fought against Spider-Man earlier tell Kingpin they got stopped by Spider-Man, unaware of the fact that there is a spider tracer on them. This leads to Spider-Man first meeting the Kingpin, where of course to Spider-Man, what he sees is a guy who is overweight, and to him meaning that he should be able to take on the Kingpin and defeat him pretty easily. And so when they do battle, at first Spider-Man is actually winning the fight, except in the middle of the fight, we see Kingpin being able to get some blows in. But right when Spider-Man is about to defeat the Kingpin and finally move on with his day, you had the Kingpin actually hit Spider-Man with knockout gas that was hidden in his suit, which leads to Spider-Man being captured by Kingpin. Now in the final chapter of this story, we actually pick up with the Kingpin and his men a few moments later after knocking out Spider-Man. This is where you have Kingpin tell his men to put Jonah and Spider-Man in this cell where the room is going to be filled with water. With that happening, of course, the goal is to drown Spider-Man and Jonah. And so you have them lock them up and walk away. Except this leads to Spider-Man waking up and realizing what is happening right now, which then leads to him breaking out of his binds and then making a web bubble around them to protect them from drowning and also give them oxygen until the room is drained out. Where of course, when the Kingpin's men drain the room out, they come to find out that Spider-Man and Jonah are still alive, which of course leads to Spider-Man to knock them out and give Jonah the chance to run away and get out of there. So Spider-Man can deal with the Kingpin without worrying about Jonah getting hurt. Except it leads to Jonah running away but not looking out where he is going, and so he runs into a metal pipe and gets knocked out by it. This leads us back over to the Kingpin and him telling Foswell that Spider-Man and Jonah are now dead. Now this is where we learn that Foswell did not want Jonah to die. That after things started to get too crazy for him, he had a change of heart. And with them having a change of heart, Kingpin can tell that Foswell does not like the news about Jonah being supposedly dead now. And so this leads to the Kingpin and Foswell having an argument, but we see that Kingpin is about to actually go for the kill and get rid of Foswell, except of course Spider-Man jumps in time. This is where you have Spider-Man fight against the Kingpin. Unlike the first fight where Spider-Man was winning at first and then the Kingpin had to cheat in a way to win, this fight is pretty even, and you have each of them share a blow on one another, looking like this fight is going to end in a draw. Except that is when you have the Kingpin reveal that he has a hidden passage in his office where he escapes through and blows up the pathway so Spider-Man cannot follow at all. But before the story closes, we actually pick up with Jonah waking up after being knocked out by the metal pipe earlier to only run into Foswell. But before they can work anything out, you have a bunch of Kingpin's men arrive to kill both Foswell and Jonah. This is where we get the death of Foswell because he tries to protect Jonah only to end up getting shot and killed. And before Kingpin's men are able to finish off Jonah, you have Spider-Man jump in and stop them. But the story truly ends with Spider-Man and Jonah going their separate ways, where you have Jonah wanting to continue his plans to get rid of Spider-Man, but first make sure the world truly knows that Foswell died a hero. And this is where we are going to end today's video. And so guys, please leave me a like down below and also subscribe for more comic book stories like this in the near future. Also, any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below, because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, I'm out of here and I will see you on the next comic book video. Later guys.